All right, welcome back everybody for another deep dive. This time, we're heading over to Italy. We're going to be checking out this Tech Pill article. It's from June 2024 from Roberto Ponzudonato over at the Computer Mania blog. And, getting ready for this, I went down some pretty interesting rabbit holes. Like, did you know that the @ symbol has all these crazy different names all over the world?
Really?
Yeah, and there's a Spotify Easter egg that turns your progress bar into a lightsaber.
Wow.
I know. Wild, right? But it's these weird little tech things that can actually connect to some really big ideas.
Yeah, I think we're going to find some pretty fascinating insights today. History, culture, even psychology. It's all kind of tied into the tech that we're using every day.
I think so, too. And speaking of fascinating, one of the first things that caught my eye in this article was this video game, Bud Spencer and Terrence Hill, Slacks and Beans. You familiar with this?
Rings a bell. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a retro-style beat-em-up game based on those classic Italian comedy films.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, all pixel art and slapstick humor. I love that they made that into a game.
It's really smart, actually. I mean, the gaming industry is really leaning into this whole nostalgia thing. You see it everywhere these days.
Totally.
It makes you wonder, though, is it really just about reliving the good old days, or is there something maybe a little deeper going on? Like maybe people are looking for something simpler, kind of a break from how complicated everything's gotten, maybe even in games themselves.
That's a great point. It makes me think about all those arcade games I was obsessed with when I was a kid.
Oh.
And speaking of making things easier, Roberto highlighted this website, 123 apps. Basically, it's got all kinds of online tools, totally free.
Oh, cool. Like what?
Audio and video editing, PDF stuff, converting files, all that.
That's awesome. Sites like that are so valuable. Not everyone can afford those fancy software programs.
Exactly. It's like having a whole digital toolbox, but you don't have to pay for it. Okay, ready for some tech trivia that just blew my mind? So you know how Facebook is blue? Well, apparently it might be, because Mark Zuckerberg is red-green colorblind.
Wow. Really? That's wild.
I know, right.
But it's kind of cool, though, to think about how even something like a personal preference can have such a huge impact on, the tech world. Like, imagine all the little decisions that have shaped, like, the entire internet we use every day.
Totally. And speaking of Facebook, remember that old rumor going around that you could tag Zuckerberg by typing @o and then 4.0?
Oh, yeah, I remember that. I think I even tried it.
Me too.
Yeah.
Total hoax, of course.
Of course.
But for a while there, it was like everyone was trying to figure out that secret code.
Yeah, it's funny how these things kind of become part of internet legend, right? Like urban legends, but for the digital age.
Love it. Okay, ready for a little trip back in time? Let's talk about the @ symbol. It actually goes all the way back to the Middle Ages, and nobody's really sure where it came from.
No kidding.
And the funny thing is, it's got all these different names in different languages, like monkey's tail, cinnamon bun, even cat's meow.
Cat's meow. That's amazing.
Oh, right.
But it really shows you how one little symbol can be interpreted so differently across cultures.
Yeah.
It reminds us that even though we're super connected online, there are still all these little differences that shape how we see and use tech.
Absolutely. Okay, one more fun fact for you before we move on. Have you heard about the hidden lightsaber on Spotify?
A lightsaber.
Yeah, so if you're listening to the Star Wars soundtrack, the progress bar turns into a lightsaber.
No way. That's so cool. Why would they even do that?
I don't know, but I love it.
Me too.
But I guess that's part of what they call gamification, right?
Right. It's like they're putting little game-like elements into stuff that isn't actually a game.
Yeah.
Which, it can be really addictive. It makes it more fun, more engaging. You remember it.
For sure. It's like finding a little treasure hidden in the app. And speaking of treasures, Roberto also talked about this YouTube channel, Once We're Nerd. It's all about retro gaming and nerd culture in general. Apparently there's a lot of comedy in it too.
Oh, interesting. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, you should. I mean, this whole nostalgia thing, it's really interesting to me.
Yeah, for sure. It's like we're all looking back at the past, right? Like maybe we miss the simplicity of it all. Or maybe we're just looking for that feeling of connection, like those shared memories that bring people together.
I think there's something to that, yeah. It's comforting to revisit those things we loved from our childhood, especially in a world that feels kind of crazy right now.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get real for a second. Let's talk about passwords.
Yeah.
We've all been guilty of using bad ones, right? Like password 123 or our birthday.
Definitely been there.
Yeah, but those are a hacker's dream come true, unfortunately.
Absolutely. We need to be using strong, unique passwords for every single account we have. It's so important. It doesn't matter how small the site seems.
Right. And Roberto actually had some good advice on how to do that, like using upper and lowercase letters, numbers, symbols. And get this, he actually made a Python-based random password generator.
Wow, that's awesome. You know, it shows how much he cares about this stuff, making sure people know how to protect themselves online.
Exactly. And speaking of online protection, have you ever heard of heuristic scanning? It's one of the ways that antivirus software can find threats.
Heuristic scanning. I think I've heard of it. How does it work?
So instead of just looking for known viruses, like based on a list, it actually tries to figure out if a program is acting suspicious. Like, is it messing with system files or trying to connect to weird servers?
So it's like it's looking for behavior that's out of line.
Exactly. It's like a detective looking for suspicious activity instead of relying on mugshots.
That's a good way to put it, so it can catch new threats that haven't been seen before.
Right. But I guess the downside is that it might also flag harmless programs that are just doing something a little different.
Yeah, true. I guess it's all about balance, right? You want to be
Mhm.
safe, but you don't want to be constantly getting false alarms.
Totally. Speaking of a balance between good and bad, let's talk about hackers. So Roberto breaks down the different types from the good guys, ethical hackers, the white hats, all the way to the bad guys, the black hats that are out to cause trouble.
Right, right. I've heard of that. It's like there's a whole spectrum of them out there.
It's crazy to think about, right? Like this whole underground world of hackers. It's like those classic hacker movies where they're always one step ahead of everyone else.
I know, it's really intriguing.
Right.
But it's important to remember that real-world hacking is a lot more complicated than what we see in the movies.
Oh, sure.
There are huge ethical questions, and, the consequences can be really serious. It's not a game.
Definitely a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, let's lighten things up again. Have you ever messed around with Google Chrome's developer tools?
A little bit, yeah.
Did you know that you can actually emulate different mobile devices right there on your desktop?
Really? Like you can see what a website would look like on a phone.
Exactly.
That's pretty handy.
Right. I mean, it's a great tool for web developers and designers because they can make sure that their websites work on, all kinds of different devices.
Makes sense. It's like having a lab full of phones and tablets right on your computer.
And finally, no Italian tech deep dive would be complete without talking about Twitter, or should I say X?
X.
Yeah. It's been one of the biggest tech stories this year.
Definitely.
Seems like everyone's got an opinion on it.
For sure.
And, Elon Musk seems to really love the letter X. Look at all his other companies.
He does, yeah. But it makes you wonder, what's he planning with this? Is it just a fresh coat of paint, or is he trying to do something completely different?
Only time will tell. But it definitely shakes things up in the world of social media.
Yeah. Who knows what the future holds?
Right. And that's all the time we have for part 1 of our deep dive into Roberto's tech pill. Stay tuned for part 2. We're going to keep unpacking these fascinating insights. Welcome back to our deep dive into Roberto's tech pill. One thing that really struck me going through all this is how, all these random tech facts, they actually show how much technology is part of our everyday lives.
Mm-hmm.
It's everywhere.
Yeah, totally. And it's not just about, the practical stuff either. We saw how something as personal as, colorblindness can actually change how a huge platform is designed.
Right.
And even something simple like, the @ symbol, like how different cultures see it in different ways. It's all about the human side of tech, isn't it?
It really is. And, speaking of the human side, let's talk about something a little less fun. Cybersecurity.
Right.
Roberto brought up some pretty serious threats, like those phishing scams.
Yeah.
They're getting really tricky, especially the ones on SMS and WhatsApp.
Yeah, it's scary how sophisticated those scams are becoming. I mean, Roberto broke down some real-world examples, and it's crazy, the lengths these scammers go to just to trick people.
It's true.
It really makes you realize you can't be too careful when it comes to your security online.
For sure. It's so easy to think it won't happen to you, but anyone can be a target.
Yeah.
So what can we do? How do we protect ourselves?
Well, the first thing is awareness. You got to know what to look for, the tricks these scammers are using.
Right.
And then just be really careful. Don't click on any links from people you don't know, and double check before you give out any personal info. And this is important. Keep your software updated.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
A lot of times those updates have security patches, to fix the weak spots that hackers could use.
Makes sense. It sounds like Roberto's got a lot of great advice on cybersecurity in his articles.
He does.
For anyone listening who wants to learn more, he's got articles about all sorts of stuff, like how to spot online scams, how to avoid misinformation. Oh,
Mhm.
and he's got one about famous hackers from history, too.
Yeah.
That sounds like a really interesting read.
Oh, yeah, that would be fascinating. And it's always cool to learn about the people who've shaped technology, both the good and the bad. It reminds us that there are real stories behind all this tech.
For sure. And speaking of shaping the world, we can't ignore what's happening with Twitter, or should we say
Yeah.
X.
Yeah.
It's been a huge deal, this whole rebranding thing. People are talking about it everywhere.
Yeah, it's bold, that's for sure. I mean, we talked about Elon Musk's love for the letter X, right? But will it work?
Who knows?
It's hard to say. We'll have to see how people react, whether this really means Twitter is changing direction.
Right. It's another twist in the crazy world of social media. And speaking of twists, remember that Once We're Nerd YouTube channel we talked about?
Yeah, the retro gaming one?
All about that nerd culture and retro gaming stuff.
Yeah.
It's really popular.
Mm-hmm.
Makes you think, doesn't it? This whole trend of looking back at the past.
It does. It's like with technology, we can actually go back and experience things from the past in a whole new way.
Yeah,
And the fact that people are creating platforms to celebrate this stuff, it's amazing. It shows how powerful nostalgia can be. Like, it brings people together.
totally. Shared memories, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And for those who want to actually play those old games, Roberto's got tutorials on how to emulate like classic consoles on your computer. Imagine playing Super Mario Bros.
Yeah,
Just like you did as a kid.
that's so cool. It's like having a time machine, right? Back to those days of 8-bit graphics.
I love that. Speaking of going back in time, we were talking about the at symbol, how old it is.
Mhm.
It's crazy how something so old is now such a big part of, the internet age.
It is. It's like symbols can change and adapt along with technology, and the at symbol is a perfect example. It's become a universal language, even though it means different things in different cultures.
Right.
Which is pretty amazing when you think about it.
It is. It shows you that technology is about way more than just gadgets and code.
Mm-hmm.
It's about people, their stories, how they interact with the world. It's about communication, connection, creativity.
Exactly. And that's what I think makes these tech pills so interesting. We're not just learning about the tech itself. We're learning about the people behind it, the culture surrounding it, the whole story, really.
I agree. Speaking of stories, Roberto also touched on the whole world of like hacking movies.
Oh, yeah.
He recommends a bunch of films that deal with hacking, cybersecurity, AI, all that.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see how these movies explore like both the potential of technology, but also the dangers.
Wait, totally. I think that genre has become really popular lately, and it's no surprise. I mean, technology is so intertwined with our lives now that these movies really tap into that.
Right, they get you thinking. And speaking of thinking, remember when we were discussing heuristic scanning? It's
Yeah.
a really powerful tool for finding threats, but it's not perfect, right?
Right. Like we said, sometimes it can be a little too sensitive, like flagging a program. That's totally fine. It's tricky, finding that balance between security and not being too restrictive.
Totally. It's about being cautious, but not letting fear control how you use technology.
Exactly. And speaking of using technology, remember that website we talked about, 123 apps? It's got all those free tools that can make your life so much easier.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one. Like having a whole toolbox right on your computer. You got your audio and video editing tools, PDF stuff, converters, all sorts of stuff.
And don't forget about the text-to-speech. I think that's one of the coolest features.
Oh, yeah. That is pretty awesome.
It's so useful for so many things, like creating audio content or even just making written stuff easier to access for people.
Yeah, technology like that can really bridge the gap.
It's amazing. It really shows you how technology can break down barriers, make information accessible to everyone.
Totally. And speaking of breaking down barriers, remember that thing about Facebook being blue? How it might be because of Mark Zuckerberg's colorblindness?
Yeah, that was pretty mind-blowing.
I know, right?
But it shows you how important it is to think about accessibility when you're designing anything,
Yeah.
Making sure everyone can use it, regardless of their abilities.
For sure. It's all about creating a more inclusive online world. And speaking of making the online world more fun, remember that lightsaber Easter egg in Spotify?
Oh, yeah. That was such a cool detail.
Right. It's like they're saying, hey, we're not just about music.
Yeah.
We're about creating a fun experience.
Exactly. And that reminds me of that Bud Spencer and Terrence Hill video game. Another example of how tech can bring back those happy memories, tap into that nostalgia.
Yeah, good point. It's like entertainment can connect generations, right? Like we can all share those same experiences and enjoy them together. Okay, before we wrap up, let's get back to something a little more serious. Hacking. We talked about the different types of hackers, but it's important to remember the ethical side of it all too.
Absolutely. There are people out there who use their skills for good, you know, to help companies find weaknesses in their systems to protect people. But then there are those who use those same skills to hurt others. It's a complicated issue.
Right, and it's a good reminder that technology is just a tool. It can be used for good or bad. It's all about how we choose to use it.
Couldn't agree more. And speaking of choices, we can't forget about password security. We tend to take it for granted, but it's so important for keeping our accounts safe. You know, remember those lists of common passwords Roberto shared?
Yeah, it's crazy how many people still use passwords like, 123456 or password. It's like leaving the door wide open for anyone to walk in.
It's true. We got to be smarter about this. Strong passwords, different for every account. And, password managers are a good idea too.
Definitely. It's all about taking those steps to protect yourself. And speaking of protection, remember we talked about mobile emulation, how you can use Chrome's developer tools to see how a website would look on a phone or tablet.
Yeah, that's a great tool.
So important these days, People are using all sorts of devices to access the internet.
Right. We're living in a multi-screen world, so you got to make sure websites work well on all of them.
Exactly. Everyone should be able to access information no matter what device they're using.
Totally agree.
Okay, so we covered a lot of ground here in part 2. From retro gaming to social media to cybersecurity.
It's been quite a journey, and it's not over yet.
Right. We're going to wrap things up in part 3, so stay tuned for that. Welcome back to the deep dive. So we're wrapping up our exploration of Roberto's tech pill here. And wow, this one really makes you think, it's like technology. It's just so many things all at once. You've got innovation, culture, security, even like personal quirks, They all come together to make up this digital world we live in.
It really is a fascinating mix, like a constantly changing tapestry or something, It keeps you on your toes, that's for sure. Always something new to learn, new ways of thinking about things.
Yeah, it definitely keeps things interesting. Take the whole Twitter thing, for example. I mean, love it or hate it, but it really shows you how quickly things can change online.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It makes you wonder what's next, right? Like what's going to happen to Facebook, Instagram?
Right. And remember how we were talking about Facebook being blue because of Mark Zuckerberg's colorblindness? It's wild how something personal like that can end up shaping a platform that billions of people use.
I know. It really highlights the human element behind all this technology, doesn't it?
It does. It's not just about the code and the algorithms. It's about the people who created the choices they make.
Exactly. And speaking of choices, we've seen so many cool tools and resources in this tech pill, haven't we? Like, remember that website, 123 apps, and that Python password generator Roberto made? It's amazing how technology can give us the power to do all these things.
Totally. It's like you don't have to be a big company or a tech expert to do amazing things anymore.
It's like technology is leveling the playing field, right? Giving everyone the opportunity to create, connect, and make a difference.
Definitely. But of course, there's also the other side of the coin, right? We can't forget about the importance of cybersecurity. All that stuff about hackers, phishing scams, strong passwords, It's a reminder that we have to be smart about how we use technology.
Absolutely. Technology can be a powerful tool, but it's important to use it responsibly. And part of that is being aware of the risks and taking steps to protect ourselves.
Right. And it's not just about protecting our devices and data. It's also about the ethical choices we make online. Like when we were talking about hacking, it really got me thinking about the impact of our actions in the digital world.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that there are real consequences to everything we do online, and that we have a responsibility to use our knowledge and skills for good.
Well said. And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Roberto Ponzo Donato's tech pill. What a journey it's been.
It really has. I think the biggest takeaway for me is that technology is so much more than just gadgets and gizmos. It's a reflection of who we are, our hopes, our fears, our creativity.
And it's constantly evolving, changing the way we live, work, and connect with each other. Who knows what the future holds, right? But one thing's for sure, it's going to be an exciting ride.
Absolutely. If you want to explore these ideas even further, definitely check out Roberto's full article over at Computer Mania. It's full of fascinating insights.
Great advice. And as always, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on the future of technology? What excites you? What worries you? Share your thoughts in the comments below.
And that's a wrap for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and share the deep dive with your friends. Until next time, keep exploring and stay curious.